How do we learn contentment?
And joining us today to discuss this, we have fellow FHU alum and minister Thomas Wise with us today. Welcome, everyone, to the show. It's a wonderful show that we're going to have for you today. We have a good friend on with us, which we'll be introducing in a moment. Before we do, of course, I'm Zach Griffin. With me is Logan Bruce. We're the hosts of this show, and we are partners.
Most of the time.
Yeah, but we are partners with the Ministry League. And I want to mention the Ministry League up front. You know, we're going to probably mention them again at the mid-roll, but I want to mention them up front because on the day we're recording today, Saturday, is their 1-year anniversary of them rebranding themselves from Adventures in Ministry to the Ministry League. Mm-hmm. And they made a lot of announcements. They talked about the network, and they actually featured us first in their list of podcasts and spoke about us. So I do want to share just that little clip of them talking about bearing up. And then right after that, just kind of want to share a special announcement about it. So roll the clip.
So on the podcast side, we have been richly blessed by a number of different podcasts. And the first one that we want to highlight is the Bearing Up podcast. Bearing Up is Zach Griffin and Logan Bruce, and they do a podcast each week. And on Thursdays is when they release their new content. And it's a really good dialogue between them as they discuss various deeper biblical topics. And so we appreciate all the stuff that they're doing, and they've got a lot of different merchandise and various things that they've put together, some pretty neat stuff. And they're also using Patreon. So if you want to check them out, go over to all their social media channels, or you can look it up on the Ministry League channel on Facebook and on YouTube and be able to see some of those as well.
And there were a lot of other podcasts. I think there's like 20 in this group.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So check out the app. They're making a lot of adjustments and updates to the app that are coming soon. They're going to be doing like a lot more video, some actual customization stuff, and documents and resources and stuff like that are going to be really good. But I want to mention, please go and check them out. Watch the anniversary video that they just put up, but also check out the video on the Ministry League Experience. They are beginning a yearly conference on Memorial Day weekend each year starting next year, and it's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. So maybe I'm going to try to get Logan to come over here to Georgia, but we'll see.
All you
how
had
that
to say was
out.
try. I'm there.
All right, so Bearing Up will be there. We'll be representing.
Awesome.
Bearing up and representing Christ, and we are so excited for that coming up and all the announcements that they made. We are very glad, very proud to be a part of the Ministry League. But with that out of the way, I've done a lot of talking. Logan, do you want to introduce our guest for today?
Sure, I can do that. Yeah, Thomas Wise is a good friend of mine. He is currently the pulpit preacher at Chesmont Church of Christ. I hope I'm saying that right, in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Thomas and I were actually roommates for half a semester at Freed-Hardeman. And he got tired of me and kicked me out. And so I'm just kidding. But I'll let him explain his side. It's probably mostly true. But anyway, Thomas, it's good to see you again, man. How's it going?
It's been great, and I was super excited because the last time y'all asked me, I was super busy. We were preparing the move and a new baby, and so it's good to be able to catch up with you all and do this together.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, we like I said, Thomas has his degree from Freed-Hardeman, just like I do. I think his is a real Bible degree. It's Bachelor of Arts, if I'm not mistaken. Mine's only Bachelor of Science, which is the fake one.
So, no.
The cheat.
I think mine's a Bachelor of Science too. I never actually remember. I took Greek when I was at the school preaching.
So I took Greek, but changed to Bachelor of Science because I wasn't about it. So there you go. We all have Ralph Gilmore's favorite BS degree. So, but yeah. So Thomas, it's good to catch up with you again, man. I'll let you explain your side of our roommate story. But we were roommates for my second semester at Freed, and I believe I don't know how long you'd already been there, but it was my second semester, my freshman year, and we started off that way, and we had two friends down the hall who will remain nameless, who weren't really getting along. And so they're like, well, we'll just swap. And I was like, that's great. We'll do that. We can just swap. And me being the innocent little freshman who also was I was a homeschooler. And so I didn't know anything about anybody or about anything. And I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't make sure that all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. And when we did the switch, I got in there and come to find out, hey, guess what? You aren't allowed to be in this room with my new roommate, because the other guy had already gone ahead and decided, well, I'm going to do all the T's and cross the T's and dot the I's. And then the guy he left was like, well, I got to find a new roommate. So he went and found a new roommate, left me without a room.
I don't remember that part, but that's hilarious.
Really? And then I had to go down to second floor, and the rest is history.
Oh, wow. See, yeah, the only thing I truly remember from all of that is I remember talking with those who remain nameless, is that, I don't know if you know this, Zach, about Logan, but he was so dirty. There was stuff all the time everywhere. That's the only thing I remember about switching. And my new roommate, we were both very clean. And so I don't know the details of, that was like 7,000 years ago, but I do remember Logan's Denver Broncos blanket and just stuff everywhere all the time. True freshman status.
Yep.
True freshman status. Just everything was a mess. And I'm like, oh no.
Well, I think he might have straightened up a little bit.
Probably.
We did prayer group in his room, and so maybe there was a little bit of straightening up he did.
And it's probably even better now. He's married with children, with a child. So, it's
Well, what I've found about being married is that your messes don't bother you, but your other people's messes bother you. And so, like, my wife and I will have the exact same amount of clothes on the floor, and we'll both be like, why do you have clothes on the floor?
Why do you leave these every time here? That's what my wife will say. The basket's right there. Why do you leave it here? It just happens.
Oh, man.
I do remember, though, we used to barter with volcano burritos. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Be like, hey, if you do this, I'll buy volcano burritos the next time.
Yeah. But really, I had no money. So I don't know about you, but I had no money. So.
Again, true freshman status. Yeah, sure, I'll barter with whatever.
Yeah, I'll scrape up some pennies off the sidewalk and buy you a burrito.
It's super funny that I was just talking with someone, those memories they're so far away already for me. Mm-hmm. And so, but they were so good. Like Bettina and I had such a great time at Freed Hardman. We got married super early. We were only in the dorm for, I think 1 year, and then we got married and moved off campus. But just the simplicity of college life is something that I would never go back, but something that I've remembered, and I enjoy thinking back about all those memories for sure.
Memories are the best part of that. And you mentioned your wife. I'll tell one more story before I let Zach get on it. But while we were roommates, it was the fall semester, or I guess it was the spring semester. So it was early in the spring semester. So you're talking like February-ish. And you had your engagement ring ready to roll. And I knew that you had shown all the guys. It was all good. And I was just sitting in the room one night. I don't know if I was playing games or what I was doing, but I was just sitting there in our room. And all of a sudden, Thomas burst in and he goes, I got to go right now. Where's my ring? It's snowing. And he grabbed his engagement ring and ran to propose because it was snowing. And I was like, that's awesome. That's just really cool. He had been waiting for the perfect situation, and it happened. And he burst in, grabbed his ring, and ran to propose.
That's hilarious.
That's a funny memory.
Because the great part is I had a long, elaborate plan for that.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if you remember, I bought a little treasure box and I was going to do like a treasure hunt, and then it snowed and it was gorgeous. And I'm like, okay, guys, let's do it.
Yeah.
I remember coming in. I remember doing the proposal. That's a great memory, man. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Good.
Man, that's how we all should like approach things. All right, God, let's go do this.
Yeah.
Man,
And she
that's
said
awesome.
yes. So that's, the story ends
Well, there
in a
you
good
go.
place. She said
right.
yes. We've been married 7 years. That's
Wow.
crazy. 7 years.
That's nuts.
We have 2 little children. Eliana is 2.5, and then Everly is 6 months as of a couple of days ago.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
It's wild, dude.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
really cool.
That's crazy. Well, yeah, it's May now. Graham, he's turning 4 this month.
What? 4 years old. And Logan, how old's your child?
She just turned 3.5.
Dude, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy stuff.
I love it.
I've got an important question before we start diving into like our deep stuff. I had Logan. He was going to say this, but I'm gonna go ahead and
Got it. Go for it.
So just a funny question. If you what would be the 3 worst ingredients if you were making a burrito? I had Sacheros yesterday, and I was thinking about this. If you had to make a burrito, maybe like a burrito for your worst enemy, what would be the 3 worst ingredients that you...
Well, there's a lot of context that has to happen here, because for one, Jesus said, love your enemies.
That's right.
So if we take the Bible and being a Christian and trying to please the Lord off the table,
just as a joke, maybe it's your best friend and it's a joke.
Okay, so Logan didn't pick up all the stuff in the room. Hey, buddy, I bought you a burrito.
There you go.
There we go.
The 3 worst ingredients. See, if we were talking toenails would be a terrible ingredient for a burrito. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. See, my mind did not go to like body parts. It went to foods like sardines.
Oh yeah.
But I just love burritos, and like people can put just about anything in there. The fact that you can just wrap it up and eat it, I'm like, man, see, even sardines, if you have some other stuff in there, could be good. So I just thought about gross stuff like toenails.
Okay.
Yeah. Man, I think mine would be like.
That changed your rating of your podcast.
No, I mean there were no stipulations at all with the question.
That's true.
So.
That's true.
Mine went that way too, like edible things, but it was the combination of 3 things could be pretty bad, like peanut butter and toothpaste and mayonnaise or something like that.
Yeah, that's way more
pretty bad.
To be fair, peanut butter and mayonnaise is not the worst thing, and I know that because this is way off topic, and I'm sorry, Zach, you did this to me, but my whole life growing up, my mom's like, "You want a peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich?" No, I know about it. Well, a few weeks ago, that was all I had, and I gave it to my daughter just to see if she'd eat it. Ate the whole thing.
Oh man.
So
actually, I would go back. No,
you told your mom every time no, and then you gave it to your daughter.
Correct. Yes. So I figured like it can't be that bad, and I'm gonna try this someday. That's on my to-do list.
Man.
Wow.
Anyway, you distracted me, Zach. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
With your peanut butter. My 3 are gonna be sardines is definitely one. Carolina Reaper pepper. And I say that because in my thought process, you think it's spicy. Okay, maybe in a burrito. But if you're going to have a pepper in a burrito, you do not want it to be the hottest thing ever because you can't see it. You're just like, oh, it's a pepper, and you're done. So those are my 2. And then my 3rd one, I went totally food. My 3rd one is going to be ketchup, and those 3 together.
That sounds gross, man.
It would be nasty.
I'm going to take the mayonnaise off of mine and say pickled beets. Have you ever had a pickled
Wait
beet?
a second. I love pickled beets. That is definitely a sense of anything. Yes, I would eat a burrito with pickled beets. Have you ever heard of a pickled egg?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so pickled beets, pickled eggs, pickled anything, really. I'm in for it.
No one is going to watch this episode. Oh, man.
Oh, wow.
Well, this has been fun. But let's go ahead. We're gonna get into our good stuff. Our not that this hasn't been fun or good.
Time to move on.
Yes, let's get into our big topic for today. And contentment is an important one. We've had over a year with the coronavirus. There have been just a lot of things in media. There have been a lot of things that have happened, perhaps in just individuals' lives that, you know, we all live and we all go through trials and we all, find it hard to find contentment sometimes. And so it's so important for us to be able to kind of grasp what this is. How do we, have it? What really is it? What are we, how can we define this? So that's how I'd like for us to begin. So Thomas, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. How would you define contentment? What do people get right about it when they're thinking about this topic? What are maybe some misconceptions about contentment? Just kind of some preliminary thoughts to get us started.
For me personally, when I think about contentment, it's a being satisfied with what you have and where you're at any given time. And, we'll get into Philippians here in a moment. And we actually just finished a class on Philippians, but, I think it's just being satisfied. And there's an idea of trust in our relationship with God to provide the things that we need. And so when we talk about truly being content, sometimes people think contentment is, once I have this job, then I'll be content. They describe it in a way that's in the future for something they don't have yet, which isn't contentment. Or they describe it in some kind of approach or philosophy of things that they don't have yet, whether it's, once I go on vacation and I can really calm down and take some things off my plate, then I'll be content. Once I get married, then I'll be content. But that's not the purpose of contentment, specifically when you're talking about where it comes from in the scriptures. So those would be some of my initial thoughts to the question.
Okay. Logan, you got anything to add?
No, that's perfect. I like the way that Thomas put it within the context of it's not a looking towards the future thing. That's something that I personally I struggle with.
Yeah.
Is I'll be content when, right? But true contentment, true self-satisfaction is in the moment thing where I don't need anything but God to be content. And we see that a lot with Job up until the point where he kind of loses it. But to be fair, who wouldn't have lost it at that point? But he's content. He's like, I've still got God. I'm still okay. And so that's kind of my view of it, is how Job approached his life. And he lost literally everything. His wife left him. He's literally just in the dirt, and he's like, you know what? It's okay.
Yeah. I think about how, it was really our generation that coined the term adulting. And there's like this, I don't know, there's this kind of pressure that especially young people, but I think all people, kind of struggle with this, but I think especially maybe it is our generation. We feel like we have to get our life together. Like I've got my life together. That's like something that you like strive for. And there were a few things that when I get married or when I have kids, when I get settled, when I get established, then I will be content. And I agree. It's not, I think it's great to set goals. I think it's great to have some ambition and drive. You want to grow, it's a good thing to be settled, have some stability for yourself, for your family. It's great to have ambition, but contentment is not, it's not the same. It's not a goal to have. It is a state of mind and a state of being that we can have regardless of where we are in our life and what we have or what we do not have.
And I really think that it's so I know we're going to get there, so I'm going to cheat and jump there anyway. So, in Philippians in chapter 2, he's talking about humility. He's talking about preaching the gospel. He's in prison. But in verse 3 of chapter 2, he says, do nothing from selfish ambition. When we describe contentment as once I have all the things I want, once I'm in the place that I want, once I have none of the problems that I don't want, that's literally purely selfishness. It's not
right.
Contentment. It's you got whatever, all the things that you wanted. So, now you can finally be content, and which is exactly how the world describes it and defines it. But that's not what we see in this book in our relationship with God, not even a little bit.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because if we have selfish ambition, if we are driven, and like I I think it's you can have ambition, you want to grow, you want to do, but if that becomes our desire and that becomes our means of gaining contentment, then we've got our priorities in a wrong place. And honestly, we're going to add to. We're going to say, all right, I've got here. What's the next thing? How else can I grow? How else can I, well, not grow necessarily, but what else can I have? What else can I go after? So there's this a fulfillment that's trying to be brought out by things and achievements and, just worldly things, this selfish ambition that it just can't, it's not congruent with the biblical view of contentment and what Paul describes here in Philippians.
And another thing you kind of allude to is that what the idea that I'll be content at some point is flawed in its nature, because you're never going to be content. It's literally quite the opposite. You'll never, like you just alluding to it, you never stop. Well, I'll be here. Well, now here. Well, now here. And it's a seeking of more, and it's a selfish pleasure seeking, maybe not pleasure, but things of this world, a worldly seeking mindset that is why we're told, be content, is why we see that. And maybe not in those words, but we see it all throughout the scripture of where you're at is enough for you. And that's hard to swallow, because we have this little whisper in the back of our ear, the little devil on our shoulder saying, but you could have more, but you could do more. You could have more. You could be more, and so
that real well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To go back though, to specifically some of the things that you said, down in verse 17 of chapter 4 in Philippians, he says, not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. Right. And so to use the word in the text that you also used is it's about what we are seeking. And so if I'm always seeking more, that's the problem. But to go back to what Zach said about the balance of it, I can not seek the things of this world, but also know that there are some goals that I can set. And I think there's a difference. I think that comes down to desire. If I'm satisfied and content with the things that I have, but I say, okay, but I'm going to keep, if I'm already healthy, but I'm going to set that I'm still going to keep going to the gym or keep walking, or, if you're already a person who is in God, you imitate me as I also imitate Christ. Paul talks about this journey that we're on. And again, I don't want to harp on it too much, but even in Philippians chapter 3, he says, not that I have already obtained, so he's pushing on to something. I reach forward, but his seeking, his desire wasn't in for worldly things. It was in for godly things. And that's why it's different.
Right.
Yeah. When thinking about the selfish ambition that drives a lot of people for contentment, even though it's misplaced, I'm reminded of what James said in James chapter 4 about selfish ambition and selfish desire. And he says, where do wars, where do fights come from among you? Is it not that your desires are burning? It's because of selfish ambition. And it just made me think that you're liable to have actually a lot more conflict in your life because you're seeking things for self.
Yeah, that's great.
And and not being content with what you have. And I believe he actually says you're not content with what you have. You want and you do not ask. He brings up a lot of these things there, and it's just like if we've got an attitude like that, we will never be content. So we have to lay aside that selfish ambition if we really want this.
I think it's a human problem that we have of never having enough. So Jesus preaches on the Sermon on the Mount, where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. You go back when God gives Solomon wisdom, and then you look where that led Solomon, and it seemed like, looking at it, it was still never enough. He falls in with foreign women, and then ultimately there's the breaking up of the kingdom. And so it's a person problem. And some people, I believe, have the gift of contentment. And I think Paul would probably lean in there of just finding true satisfaction in life wherever you're at and whatever you're doing. But we're always looking. We live in a world and we're always looking at it. Do not covet, one of the 10 commandments, and so we're always looking at all this stuff around us and it can start off so small, like, oh man, if I only had that, that'd be nice. Yeah. If I had, so we have 2 kids now, and I say to Tina, like, but if we got an SUV, it would look cooler, man. We got a straight Honda van, but I love that van. And I'm much more content now with the van than I've ever been, like, with stuff like that in my life. But you're always looking. And, we live in a world where we look and compare ourselves to others. And it doesn't matter who you are. Preachers compare themselves to other preachers. Churches compare themselves to churches. It's like, oh, what are they doing over there? Well, we have to do this. And it's just this selfish ambition that drives us to be more in the world's eyes or the eyes of other people. And so I do think it's an incredibly pertinent topic to our lives as Christians, because I think sometimes Christians fall into this trap even more so than the world because of our, who we're trying to be. I was like, okay, I just need to be this, and this. And so I think that's something that's really important for us to discuss.
I agree. I think that a lack of contentment is a huge source of personal, like, heartache for people. And I say that, it can even go as far as leading things like anxiety. You get people where they are so worried about what other people think and the way people view them or how they view themselves, that they just almost give up. And it's just like, I can't fix it. I'm not good. And they're just anxious and it's just unhealthy. Whereas what God is really trying to get us to understand, what Paul really wants us to hear, is that you're already good in God's eyes. So be good in your own eyes, and don't force yourself to try to be something you're not, first of all. And second of all, don't allow yourself to be viewed. Don't view yourself, rather, through the eyes of other people except for God.
Yeah. Both of you guys said something just fantastic there that I was thinking about. And it just kind of popped into my mind concerning this, is that, Thomas, you said that this is kind of a human problem. And maybe the reason why it is a human problem is because we are made for something greater. We were created in the image of God. If we go back to the beginning and we see humanity walking with God in Eden, and giving humanity dominion over all the earth. Dominion, it's like an heir, a kingliness, a royalty above all of creation. And in this relationship with God, we were made for something greater. And so maybe the desire for something greater is something that God instills in us. And contentment comes when we fill that void with the right thing.
Yeah, there's a difference.
Selfish ambition comes from trying to fill that with, earthly things. We have a desire for something greater when we're in God, and we have confidence and assurance in God of our eternal home, of the fact that He is always continually present with us. If we value Him in a certain way, if we value Him above all other things, then we're fulfilled. And I think that might be a part of where that contentment is too. God made us, and Logan, you presented in this way that, he made us, and He has a desire for us, and He has a view of us. And when we understand that view, maybe we don't understand it fully, but as we grow in that knowledge of how God views us, how we are to have Him in our lives, maybe that's how we can develop this a little bit more. So we're going to jump into this. We're going to look at specifically a verse that's important there in Philippians chapter 4 in just a moment. But before we do, let's take a quick break.
Thank you for watching Bearing Up Podcast today. We're so glad you decided to join us. A couple things to remind you about. We're on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, and we dabble in Twitter every now and again. And so make sure to follow us on all that. Check out the Ministry League Network. Zach plugged that at the beginning of the episode, but definitely make sure to check them out. There's a lot of great resources, not just podcasts on there, and we really encourage you to look at that. And finally today, make sure to go check out our Patreon. We have a lot of good stuff on there. It's extra content, stuff that you get beyond this podcast. We've got the Mug Club. There's live videos, and that top tier, you can be a part of the episode. You can be right here with us filming the episode, quietly watching, obviously, but a part of the episode. So be sure to check that out, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.
Well, let's jump back into this. I've got a phrase that really stuck out to me, and it's kind of really the inspiration behind this episode today. It's Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11. Now, as Thomas kind of mentioned, as we sort of discussed here, the book of Philippians, it talks a lot about this subject. It talks a lot about finding joy, even in, Paul's writing this in prison, and he's, it's the book of joy. A lot of people regard it as such. I love in Philippians chapter 2 talking about I count everything as rubbish for the sake of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Such powerful things here. But he says there in verse 11, not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. He has learned this. And that's kind of what made me think, all right, how does one learn contentment? We can describe what contentment is. We can, define it. We can, talk about what the Bible says about contentment and things like that. But I want to kind of talk about this process of learning. Because he says, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. So what are your thoughts on this, guys?
I think the beautiful thing about the life of Paul, again, he writes from a perspective of in prison, which instantly makes his talking about joy all the more powerful, in my personal opinion. But the process of learning contentment, look at Paul's life. He was at the pinnacle of in Judaism. He's, Pharisee of Pharisees. He did all these things. He had the authority of the temple to go and to chase after these Christians. He had power and authority and support, and then he lost it all for the sake of Christ. And so you look at when he talks about it in 1 Corinthians, I went through this and I went through this. The way that we learn is it's the school of life, if you will, because what it seems to me is people miss out. They're reaching for something, they don't get it. They didn't learn that it wasn't theirs to have. And so they're always reaching for something and never having it and missing the moment. I'll give you a personal example. So, with our first daughter, Eliana, we would always talk about, well, I can't wait till she does this. I can't wait till she does this, yada, yada, yada. But every time I say something like that, I always preface it with, but I love the moment that we have right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love this moment. Yeah, I can't wait till she talks. And now I'm like, girl, can you be quiet? But I can't wait for this. But right now is where we're at. And this is a beautiful moment. Don't miss it. And so when you look at what Paul says, I have learned, he had been all over the place. He has been on his missionary journeys. He has seen the best parts and the worst parts of humans. And, he's learned that it's going to come, it's going to go, it's going to rise, it's going to fall. Contentment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It is the school of life. And it's just like, there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. There's, being book smart, and having common sense and being able to lead and to guide and to act wise, to be wise. But I think what's also crucial about that is the perspective that you have as these things take place. I mean, have y'all ever met somebody who was older and they were just a grouch? Like they were just incredibly grouchy individual. But I
will never say I plead the fifth. No one.
You don't have to say names. You just say, yeah, I know somebody.
No.
No, of course not. I've never.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And so like how do you get towards the end of your life, an older person like that, and you've even been a Christian for most of it, and you turn out to be a grouch, and and everything is just like you're never happy about anything. You're always being critical of others. Obviously they're not content with. Maybe
well,
not content
what that
with
is,
preaching.
in my opinion, Zach, is that's the result of a life. Not every situation, but a lot of times it's the result of a life of not being content and striving to be content, and then getting towards the end and realizing I'm not what I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sad to me, because I think we all know somebody who's kind of like that, and maybe that's not the case. Maybe they're just grumpy because they're old. But I know what you're talking about. One thing I wanted to add is Paul kind of spells this out for us. He says in verse 11, I have learned the secret of being content. Or, excuse me, he says, I have learned to be content. Then he says in verse 12, right after that, I've learned the secret of being content. Well, great, Paul. Are you going to tell us? And then it's like one of the most famous verses in all of Scripture, and it says, "I am able to do all things through Him who strengthens me." And that's the secret, Paul's secret to contentment, is that I can do what I need to do because of God. And that's kind of, at least that's how I read this passage. And he's leading up. I've learned how to be content. I've learned the secret. It is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I think that verse is a lot used out of context sometimes. But when we read it with this contentment lens, it kind of changes the way we perceive it.
Yeah, it's not about kicking a 50-yard field goal.
Correct. Well, I'm just kidding.
I do want to say, so, oh man, so as I was teaching Philippians over these it was the first book that I taught here at the church since I wanted to focus on something that was good. In a hard time, let's focus on something that's good. Philippians is the best picture of that in my mind. You go back to chapter 3, verse 12, he says, not that I've already obtained this or I'm already perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus had made me his own. Mm-hmm. And in that passage, it's so gorgeous because, that was Paul's desire. That was Paul's focus. That's why when he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, it's bringing all these thoughts together about the selfish ambition from chapter 2, the principles you see in chapter 3, him being in prison but rejoicing because Jesus is being preached, because Jesus has made him his own. He had a home. He belonged somewhere. He was protected. He was going to have life after death. Sometimes I'm hungry. That's okay. Sometimes I have plenty. That's okay. Sometimes it's going to be up here. Sometimes it's going to go down here. I can do all things through Christ, the knowledge of Christ, the life in Christ, because he strengthens me with that hope and with that grace. And that's good stuff right there, man.
That's
right.
Preach. Yeah. This is the book where he says our citizenship is in heaven.
I don't belong here. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Right here at the end of chapter 3, he says that. And talks about that transformation that's going to take place. And it doesn't matter that he's in chains at that moment, because he knows that that's just temporary. That's just I mean, the fact that he speaks about the tent, we can be content because we know that, it's just like growing up and being in school and you have a test and you're like, like my life depends on me making well on this test.
Those were the days.
This one test in high school or in college, and you're like, it all comes down to this. Well, did your life keep going after that?
Yeah.
Did it really make all that much of a difference? Probably not. But in the moment, you're probably thinking, oh man, this is so huge. But then, it just doesn't turn out to be that way. And
I think that's a good point. So I guess I would describe it as we miss contentment when we're short-sighted, because I remember
Yes.
Bettina and I almost broke up at Freed Hardeman. I don't know if you know that side note, juicy detail. Yeah, obviously this would be before I proposed to her. And I remember my world being like in pure and utter chaos. Here we are, married 7 years, 2 years down the road, or 2 children. And, it's like, we're so short-sighted. We only see what's directly in front of us to go off the thought that you had. Paul's focus was never on the world. And again, you think about what he says here, for me, and he says it in chapter 1, no, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. His focus, while it was on the support of the churches, was always for eternity. And that's how he found contentment. And I think that's why we often miss it.
Yeah. The short-sightedness. And, I was talking about this. This is kind of a cool thing. Tomorrow, we are establishing elders. We have been a congregation that has not had elders. And so by the time this comes out, we've already established elders.
Okay, so side question. So who are the elders to me?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I guess I can say. Carl Weisenbaker is one, Doug Loftus, and Scott Jeffrey. So those are our men. Tomorrow, 4 days ago, same difference.
That's pretty cool.
So, yeah, very excited about that. But one of the things we talked about kind of leading up into this is that, good leadership and being able to make good scriptural decisions is not being short-sighted, but thinking about the big picture, thinking about things going forward, thinking about heaven in mind.
Yeah.
So it's not just contentment has to do with not just how I'm feeling, but it becomes such a part of who we are that it invokes us to make decisions that are based off of the grand scheme of things. Knowing that there's an eternal home, we are content to go to the stranger and say, do you go to church anywhere? Do you know about Jesus Christ? What is your faith like? Can we sit down and talk? Being able to approach somebody and have confidence, and even, address those who would challenge. And it's no difference to me. I stand with the truth, and it doesn't matter if they make fun of me, or it doesn't matter if it does not matter, because there's a home, and it does not matter if things go poorly for me because I stand for the truth. Paul writing from prison again, just going to bring that up over and over again. He's talking about these things. Really, what does that matter to us? And I think about how Peter addressed the subject really of evangelism, and standing as a Christian and living as a Christian and suffering and saying, don't think it's strange that you're suffering because of this. But he also says, you are a chosen nation, a royal priesthood, a holy people set aside, purchased by God. There is something greater than any momentary affliction or trial or anything like that. And so we can be content looking for that, for that heavenly home.
That's kind of interesting. That's a hard one for somebody, for some people to take, because it seems as if the answer is just do it, just be content. How do you be content? And you just do it. But the reality of there's so much, it's so much more in depth than that. Topics like this remind me of fibrous roots, if you will, if you remember biology. I had some big bushes in the front of my yard, and a taproot, which some weeds, I like the weeds that are taproots, because you just pull them out and the whole root just comes out one. But I had these big bushes I just took out, and it went for probably, it was massive root system, but it was all these little tiny roots that were just entangled with the dirt. And when you pulled them up, when I finally got them up, some more dirt came with them than actual tree. And that's the way, if you will, I'm sorry, we're backing up, but that's the way this kind of is it seems simple on the outside, but there's so much more to it. It's so deep. It's so interwoven with itself that you have much more to this being content than it seems. there's the idea that, it's in everything. Paul doesn't say I'm content when things are going good. I'm content when things are bad. And we've alluded to that obviously already, but you look at it and it's like, it's so much more than just, well, just do it. It's not something I can just snap my fingers. Oh, I'm content now. Oh, or you're going to listen to this episode and be like, oh, I just need to be content. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
It's more in depth than that. It's more of a lifestyle thought process changing thing to where I don't need that. And I think a lot of it, maybe I'm wrong, but I think a lot of it can start with self-denial. And y'all can correct me on that if you need to, but for somebody who is a very self-indulging personality, I have to practice self-denial a lot. I don't need I don't need to go and spend this money, or I don't need to go and have 4 sodas a day. There has to be some self-denial going on in order for me to really appreciate and to really take that first step to being content. And so it's more of a mindset changing thing than I think that even a lot of people realize.
Yeah, I'm really glad you've kind of made this of like a 3-dimensional idea. It's not just a surface level thing. And it kind of makes me think about how, like there's a difference between being happy and being joyful and having joy. God expects us to grieve whenever there are times where, grieving is necessary. I mean, and not to get off topic here, but we had a member who passed away this past week, my age. Just random. It did not, they didn't know exactly why off the bat. We still don't know why. But just, he was hanging out with his kids and then just killed over. And and it was just like, it was incredibly surprising for all of us and to his young wife. And God expects her to grieve. God expects us to grieve and maybe even to ask questions and to just experience that loss. But at the same time, that does not necessarily mean that there is no contentment at all. It's just like, it's being happy is not the same thing as having joy. Being happy does, we can be content and not be happy about the particular moment or the circumstances that we're in. But we understand that as we're going through those things, that God has not left us.
Right.
God has not left us. The promise still remains. He has a plan. If I love him and I'm called according to his purpose, there's a greater thing to this than what I'm experiencing right now. I'm not short-sighted. I'm looking for the future. I'm looking to him. And so I can grieve and experience loss even and still have contentment. It's a 3-dimensional, it's a deeper issue than what a lot of people think. And that's why, kind of going at the beginning with this great misconception about contentment. Well, when I achieve this level, when I have what I'm wanting, then I will be content. That's a very surface level idea about what contentment is. And that's just not true.
No.
That is not what contentment is. It's something deeper. It's a relationship, and so much more.
I would add, I think about contentment in this way. So sometimes it's about the stuff, like people don't have enough stuff. That's why they don't have contentment. I want this, but it's also in your situation. So I want to read a passage that really, I put this, as I was going through this, it stood out to me back in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So there's context here, obviously, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul's answering the questions that they have. It says in very first chapter 7, verse 1, now concerning the matters which you wrote, he's going to talk about marriage and sexual immorality. But if you go down to verse 17, it says, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Now I'll pause because so often it's not the stuff that people are seeking, but a different situation. Like our situation is never what we want it to be. I want to be, a 40-year-old preacher that's got the health of a 20-year-old preacher that, can do all these things, has freedom, but also has structure. We always want this other situation, this other context. And so he says, let him not seek circumcision, for neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. He always comes back to this relationship with God is of the utmost importance. But keep reading. We'll read down through verse 24, if that's okay. He says, for neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Were you a bondservant? Now, obviously, there's a major struggle with that when we're talking about slavery. He says, when you were called, do not be concerned about it. As in, that's not your focus. That's not your, and again, you can't imagine being a slave, but slavery was a big part of the time period, beyond the shadow of a doubt, with all different levels of slaves, if you would. Do not be concerned about your situation. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself to the opportunity. He's not saying that you should always be a slave, or, that shouldn't be your focus. Again, verse 22, for he who was called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freed man of the Lord. My relationship with God is way more bigger. Is that Donald Trump quote?
I was going to say it trumps, but yeah.
So yeah, it trumps your situation here on earth. And he goes, likewise, he who was free when he is called is the bondservant of Christ. You were bought with the price. Do not become bondservants of men, which is what we do when we want all these things, and we're talking about materials or moments or these situations. So brothers, in whatever condition each was called, there let him remain with God. And so as I'm going through Philippians, I think about contentment. And then Paul says this, no matter what situation you find yourself in, your focus is on the commandments of God, and you were bought with a price. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but I'm like, that blows my mind, because we get so distracted by, and, preachers fall into this. You have preachers that hop every couple years, and I never read into a tent, but sometimes when you get to know them and talk to them, it's just because it's not enough. It's never enough. No situation is good enough. And that's a struggle that not just preachers have, but we have as Christians and people have in general. And Paul says, don't worry about your situation. Be in God. You were bought with a price. Don't become bond servants of men. And I don't know if that's off topic or not, but First Corinthians 7 was and so some other things I have right here. So in First Timothy 6:6, he's talking about, I better read it so I don't misquote it. He talks about but godliness with contentment is great gain. You go to the context, he's talking about false teachers. Again, a situation with people involved. You go to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8. Again, he's talking about contentment there. Verse 8 says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency, it's the same word as contentment, or all contentment, in all things at all times you may abound in every good work. So when we're giving, we're supposed to be content. When we're dealing with false teachers, we're supposed to be content with this idea of sufficiency and satisfaction only in God. And then the last one that I have here, and this is literally just a reference in my Bible, was Hebrews 13, verse 5. Keep your life free from money, from the love of money, and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. You're in a book where the Christians are falling away, going back to Judaism. They wanted a different situation. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And here's the book ends. He talks about being content there. And so as I was preparing for the topic, I was like, there's this idea of sometimes it revolves around stuff. But I think more often than not, it's the situation we find ourselves in that we're not satisfied with. And that's probably one of the biggest traps of not being content. And you see it in book after book and verse after verse, where God, through the inspired writers, are trying to get them to see your situation in this world does not matter. Be faithful. And so you go back to the passage in Philippians. He says, whatever I find, wherever I'm at, I have learned the secret. I can do all things in this life through Christ who strengthens me. And that's how we miss it. Our situation isn't what we want it to be. And, the Bible's pretty clear about going through that and saying you need to remain focused. You need to remain focused. This world's going to pass away. Remember who you are and who you belong to.
Yeah, man. That's
Sorry if that was a little preachy. I always tell the church, like, we're going through a text, and I'm like, okay, I know I'm getting a little preachy. I just can't help myself.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you get dialed in. I do the same thing. I've probably done it in this episode, but you get into a thought and you're like, it's like I gotta.
I love it.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I do want to. We can talk about some other things as well before we close up. But one thing I do want to mention before we do is that thorn that Paul talked about in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And this is brought up a lot with contentment, but I kind of wanted first, I want to see what you guys think the thorn was. What do you think?
Have you ever seen the meme on Facebook? It's SpongeBob. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen it? It makes me laugh every time I see it. It says Paul's thorn in the flesh, and it has a little picture of SpongeBob saying some quote. I'm like, first off, that's hilarious. Who's taking time to make this stuff? But
He's
anyway,
the messenger of Satan.
Yeah. I don't really know. And ultimately, how I approach stuff with this is it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't.
The beautiful thing about this idea is Paul's content, but he also has a desire for something to be different. And that's okay. We can want something different, but it can't drive us. It can't be the thing that we seek. And that's what Paul talks about in Romans. And that's his principle. That's his message. That's his life here in Philippians. So he's like, yeah, I wish this was different. Maybe it's his eyesight. Some people say, whatever it is. He says, I wish you could take this away from me, but my grace is sufficient for you. Contentment. We can wish something was different, but if it can't be our desire, it can't be the thing that we seek the most. It can't be our main focus, and you never see that with Paul, with that thorn in the flesh. But that's my non-preaching.
No, I think you're right, and that's it's great that it is kind of ambiguous because it's almost like, well, insert here what your thorn is, insert this thing that is a concern in your life, that you want it to go away. You appeal to God over and over and over about it. And I think there are some things in our lives, some people it's addiction. Some people it is relationship-based issues with their family, parent child relationships, divorces. There are relationship issues. There are so many different kinds of things that can, there's a reason why there's that phrase, it's a thorn in my side. And we have those things, and we may desire for things to be different. But yeah, that's the thing. It cannot be for us this, what it becomes is it becomes an idol. It becomes a, I am desiring after something that is getting in the way of me finding peace with God, peace where I am in my life. I'm going to be closing on my house. I'm buying a house.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And I've been desiring to do that for a long time, but has it been like a compulsive need for me? Has it been something that has caused me to be depressed or anything like that? No, because I've been in a good situation, and I've been, I've just been incredibly loved and helped, and, in God's timing, if that's meant to be, then I'm just going to trust that, that it'll happen whenever that happens. And so we shouldn't have these things that say, all right, when I get to this point, then I'll be at peace, but until then I'm going to be losing sleep every night. I'm going to have this constantly on my mind. What ought to be constantly on our mind is not all the things that I wish I had, or the situation in my life to be better or to change in some certain way. Instead, it's as Paul said to the Thessalonians, you pray without ceasing. You are constantly in thanksgiving. I think if we actually take the practice of being thankful all the time, we realize just how much God has provided for us and how he continually cares for us. And it's like, if you sat down and thought about all the things that you're thankful for, I think the result is you feel a lot more content, at least, because you know that God has not left you and that he is your Lord. He is your God, that your Father that cares for you. And it's just like, if we keep our sights set on him, I'm also reminded of, in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, lay aside every weight and the sin which clings to us. The weight may be those desires for other things that get in the way from us having the relationship with God that we should. But yeah, that was me preaching a little bit.
Now, I don't want to lose the, I want to say one other thing I was just thinking about, because like you go to the context of Philippians chapter 4, and I told the church about verse 7, and I think this is a real struggle with contentment, because the more I think about this, sometimes it's stuff, sometimes it's the situation, but sometimes it's the things that we don't know. And so Paul says in verse 7, and the peace of God which surpasses all understanding. We can find contentment in all the stuff that we don't know yet. Oh man, I just can't wait to know how this is going to turn out. This struggle, what's going to happen with the world and with the government, with coronavirus, all those things we can't control and we don't know yet. Our contentment in God, this, he talks about it specifically in the context. Focus on the things that are good. It surpasses all understanding. How often, maybe throughout your day, like, I have no idea. Like someone will ask me a question, I'm like, I can't begin to, I don't know. That's the one thing about being a preacher. Like when people ask you questions, they're like, oh, what about blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, you should talk to, oh no.
Oh wait, I'm the person they're supposed to go to.
And so, he talks about this, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, is an important part of that contentment. Because again, Paul doesn't really know how his life's going to turn out, as in what's going to happen with prison. He has these expectations. He says he thinks this is going to happen, this is going to occur, yada, yada, yada. But you just don't know. And sometimes the things that we don't know cause us to not be content as well. And he addresses all these beautiful, beautiful topics here in chapter 4. And it's just, as I tell the people, delicious.
Delicious. I like that. That's great. Well, I think maybe it would be a good idea just to kind of reemphasize, summarize a little bit about what we're talking about.
Hold on. Before we do that, I have a sermon to preach. I'm just kidding.
As together we stand and sing.
Yes. No, I do. I'll, if you don't mind, Zach, I'll kind of summarize a little bit, and then I'll let you, if you need to, again, if I miss anything. But I think what we've looked at today is so important because of where we're at as a culture, where we're at in the world right now. I mean, we are it's nothing we've ever experienced. And I know you could always say that, and everybody ever who come before me could have said the same thing. But we live in an age of access, and that makes contentment the hardest thing, probably the hardest we've ever had it is, let me rephrase that. This is the hardest we've ever had it when it comes to being content, because of the age of access we live in, where I can have anything I want within 2 days, even out here in the middle of nowhere, just because of Amazon Prime. So there's no limit to the access we can have, and that makes contentment hard, and that makes looking at myself in the mirror and saying, where am I at? That makes that difficult. And so, maybe we can personally define contentment, but when we really approach God's throne and say, God, you're all I need, and you've made me good, and so I am all I need. I am good the way I am. I don't need to try to be something I'm not. Then we can really begin to have contentment.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even mention like having mindfulness with God, setting
Yes.
aside all of our distractions and things like that, because this instant gratification world where your phone constantly is blinking lights and vibrating and telling you to keep up with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And I, they're doing really good. What am I doing with my life? There's the social media aspect that we haven't really discussed,
Yeah.
and the just taking time. And we're not going to talk about mindfulness, but maybe that's a different discussion.
We have a lot of episodes where we say that'll be another episode.
That's good.
We'll have to go back and watch it.
We really need
Get some
to.
ideas.
All of season 3 is going to be recapping episodes from season 2.
Extended bonus
Part 2s.
Yeah, there you go. So, but yeah, I think that's great, Logan. And Thomas, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I really needed this, truly, honestly. So for one, this is what I'm going to teach in Bible class tomorrow. So we're doing virtual. We're going to do, I'm going to live stream Bible class. And because we have some of those members that were sick. And so we've just finished Philippians, but I didn't hit this enough because I think the topic is prevalent. It's a theme in the book of Philippians, and it's really important. So talking with you all today helps me to realize that first and foremost, how I like to preach and teach is for myself. It's so easy to talk about contentment. It's so easy to talk about living in the moment and being grateful. But a key to this is being honest in your own heart about what you truly desire. And nobody else can know about that except you and God. And so, because we can preface everything as Christians and justify just about anything, but deep in here, am I really content? And there's some things in my life that say, if I was to be honest, I'm not content, and it causes problems. And those are things that I have to address as a Christian, because I don't want to miss the point of, what we talked about. So thank you for the topic. I didn't realize I needed it as much as I did. And so I'm grateful to be able to discuss those things with you and to laugh and talk about burritos. Who doesn't love talking about burritos?
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you, man. And it's just being able to have good brotherly conversation with each other on important topics like this. I mean, you definitely come away with some self-reflection, but you come away encouraged too.
Yeah, for sure.
Having had the opportunity. So we thank you so much for coming on with us today. Everyone, remember, check out the Ministry League, check out our Patreon. Thomas, thanks again for coming on. Logan, why don't you close us up with a prayer today?
Absolutely. Let's pray. Lord God, I thank you so much for this conversation I've had today with my brothers here. Lord, I pray that you bless us with contentment, and God, that we focus on being content. Lord, I guess when you think about it, you've already blessed us with the ability to be content. I pray that we tap into that. I pray that we realize that we are good and that we don't need anything but you. Lord, I pray that you be with Thomas in his work in Pennsylvania. I pray that you be with his wife and his children, that they are growing up in you. And Lord, I pray that you bless him in every way that he needs you, God. And I pray that you just constantly with him. Lord, be with us as we go throughout this life. I pray that we're like Christ to everybody we meet. It's in his most precious and holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Man, that's fun, dude. That was good.
Thanks for watching.